Welcome to True Echo, where real stories echo louder than fiction. Every week, we bring you dramatic, inspirational tales that blend truth and imagination so powerfully, you'll swear they actually happened. Today's story is no exception. What starts as a quiet insult inside a pristine bank lobby becomes a tidal wave of justice that shakes the entire financial world. Watch closely because what unfolds will challenge everything you thought you knew about power, prejudice, and what happens when the underestimated finally rise. The fluorescent lights inside Crescent First Bank's flagship Michigan Avenue branch hummed with a clinical chill. Everything gleamed, the marble countertops, the brass nameplates, even the corporate smile worn thin across every face behind the counter. Danielle Moore stepped into the lobby precisely at 10:58 a.m., heels quiet, expression neutral, posture controlled. Her navy cardigan, crisp slacks, and modest leather handbag made her look like any well-prepared professional running a morning errand. And that was exactly the plan. She approached the teller line with calm deliberation. Beth, a young blonde woman whose makeup was as precisely applied as the lettering on her gold name badge, glanced up without recognition. Her eyes flicked briefly from Danielle's skin to her clothes to the slip of paper placed gently on the counter. "A withdrawal?" Beth asked, already sounding suspicious. Danielle nodded once. "Yes. 125,000. Identification is here." Beth's smile barely shifted as she slid the slip back. "Ma'am, we don't just hand out large amounts of cash to anyone." The sentence settled like frost across the lobby. Danielle didn't react, didn't blink. She stood perfectly still, the kind of stillness that unsettles people more than rage. A man nearby paused mid-step. A mother with a stroller turned her head. A teenager waiting by the loan officer's door lifted his phone slightly, not quite recording, not yet. Beth didn't take the ID. She nudged it backward like it was counterfeit or contaminated. "I'm going to need to speak with my manager," she added, voice sugary but stiff. A few feet away, a woman in a tailored burgundy pantsuit, branch manager Alyssa Connors, stepped into view. She didn't greet Danielle. Didn't ask if there had been an issue. She merely folded her arms and narrowed her gaze. "You said you wanted to withdraw how much?" Alyssa asked, though the number was printed clearly on the slip. Danielle answered with precision. 125,000. "I confirmed the daily limits. My account has the funds." Alyssa smirked slightly. "That's quite a bit of money. What's it for, if you don't mind me asking?" She hadn't asked the white man earlier about his $70,000 withdrawal, nor the woman with the Cartier bracelet about her 90. But a black woman in modest clothes? That warranted scrutiny. Danielle's tone remained even. "A personal transaction." The silence thickened. Greg from Senior Services strolled over, arms loose, sleeves rolled. His watch flashed beneath the lights, an ostentatious thing worth more than some people's cars. He didn't introduce himself. Just glanced at Danielle's paperwork and made a sound somewhere between a grunt and a laugh. Behind him, Ryan leaned in toward Greg and muttered, "Maybe it's one of those injury settlements. You know how it goes." Greg chuckled audibly. Danielle didn't flinch. Her fingers tapped the edge of her handbag. Not with nerves, with timing. Everything was happening exactly as she predicted. This wasn't random. It was orchestrated. A pressure test of her own institution. Alyssa took a deep breath and leaned forward. "I'm sure you can understand. This amount of money raises questions. We have to be cautious." Danielle's eyes never left hers. Cautious with whom? Alyssa didn't answer. Neither did Beth. Neither did Greg. The silence wasn't professional. It was revealing. Danielle reached into her bag and calmly retrieved her phone. She turned slightly and dialed. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. "Yes, Evelyn. It's happening now. Michigan Avenue branch." A few heads turned. Danielle lowered her phone. "Yes. I'll remain on site. Thank you." When she hung up, she didn't need to explain who Evelyn Hart was. But Alyssa's expression faltered just slightly. The name was familiar, and it carried weight. "Now," Danielle said with tranquil finality, "may I complete my transaction?" Beth looked visibly uncomfortable. Alyssa's voice sharpened. "No, this doesn't feel right. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Danielle's voice was softer than ever. "You're refusing service?" Alyssa's lips thinned. "We reserve the right to deny service without cause." Danielle nodded. "Because I meet every standard and yet, here I am." It was then that the door to the lobby opened with a quiet hiss. Someone had arrived. The reckoning was coming. But Danielle didn't need them to be afraid. She needed them to reveal themselves, and they had. Evelyn Hart arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet force of someone used to cleaning messes behind closed doors. Her heels struck the marble tile with deliberate purpose, and for a brief second the entire room froze. The security guard, Thomas, straightened. Beth's fingers hovered uncertainly over the terminal. Greg stepped back instinctively, and Alyssa's voice, once so assured, caught in her throat. "Miss Hart?" Alyssa managed, her face flushing. This is a surprise." Evelyn didn't respond. She walked directly to Danielle, her voice loud enough to carry across the pristine lobby. "Miss Moore, I apologize for the treatment you've received. It is unacceptable. And it ends now." You could feel the oxygen suck from the room. Silence fell thick and total. The customers now fully abandoned the pretense of minding their own business. Phones were raised. Whispers swirled. Ryan's smirk vanished. Beth gasped softly, covering her mouth. Danielle offered a small nod of thanks but didn't speak. She didn't have to. The truth was unraveling faster than any apology could fix. Evelyn turned slowly, facing the staff. "Let me be absolutely clear for everyone here. This woman, this customer who was profiled and denied service, is Danielle Moore, President and CEO of Crescent First Bank." The impact was instant. Greg staggered as if physically struck. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed again. Beth looked like she might be sick. Alyssa simply blinked, not once, not twice, but 3 full times, her entire world collapsing with each breath. Danielle finally turned to face her. 10 years you've managed this branch," she said quietly. "And not once did you stop to wonder why clients of color withdrew at triple the rate of others? Why they left your branch and never returned?" Alyssa opened her mouth, eyes glossy. I didn't know." "Yes," Danielle said. "You did. You just didn't care." Evelyn stepped in again, her tone razor sharp. "Alyssa Connors, as of this moment, you are relieved of your duties. You will be escorted from the premises. Legal will follow up with appropriate documentation." Greg slammed a hand against the counter. "This is insane. One mistake and we're thrown out." Danielle's voice was steel. "One mistake is forgetting a form. What happened here was a culture, built on assumptions and casual cruelty. You mocked a client. You humiliated a person who met every requirement, and you did it with a smirk." Evelyn nodded toward Thomas, who stepped forward. "Gregory Dawson. Ryan Campbell. You are both terminated, effective immediately." Ryan looked like he might cry. Greg tried to protest again, but Evelyn raised a hand, silencing him. "Policy matters. So does respect. And you failed both." As security escorted them through the lobby, the same customers who had watched quietly now stared with a strange sense of catharsis. A reckoning had taken place, and for once, it landed on the right side of the counter. Behind the teller line, Beth stood frozen, eyes wet. Danielle walked toward her slowly. The young woman flinched. "You looked uncomfortable," Danielle said softly. Beth nodded, ashamed. I didn't know what to do. I should have said something. I wanted to. You didn't escalate it. But you didn't stop it either," Danielle replied. Then she paused. "You're not being fired today. But you will need to earn your place going forward." Beth nodded again, tears sliding freely now. "I will. I promise." Danielle turned toward the room, her voice calm but purposeful. "What happened here today is not an isolated event. It's a mirror. And we're going to use it, not just to punish but to rebuild." 3 days later, the press gathered under the glass dome of Crescent First's main atrium. What was once a neutral space for quarterly earnings calls now bore the weight of transformation. The gold logo glimmered behind the podium, and the room brimmed with journalists, cameras, and cautious anticipation. Danielle Moore stepped forward in a navy suit that fit like resolve itself. She didn't flinch from the moment. She welcomed it. "What happened at our Michigan Avenue branch," she said, "was not unusual. It was unacceptable. And that's why it matters." She paused, her voice lowering. "This is not about me. It's about every person who was ever told without words, 'You don't belong here.' Every client who had to prove they deserved respect. Every employee who stayed quiet out of fear. That ends today." The screens behind her lit up, charts, community photos, policy slides. But the most powerful image was a simple plaque that read, "All customers deserve dignity, fairness, and respect. If your experience falls short, call this number." And below it, Danielle Moore's direct office line. The room gasped audibly. Danielle continued, unmoved. "Equity isn't a buzzword. It's a business model. We're investing $50 million into rebuilding trust, through inclusive hiring, training, and a customer equity advisory board made up of the very people the system ignored. And then she stepped aside, letting the images speak. A small business owner signing his first loan. A grandmother opening an account without fear. A black girl in braids watching a teller and whispering, "I want to work here one day." Danielle didn't look for applause. She wasn't here for optics. She was building proof. And in the back of the room, unnoticed by most, a 13-year-old boy named Jordan sat next to his mother. He had written a letter once, long before any of this made the news. And today he would hear his name whispered on the lips of bankers who finally understood what legacy really meant. The fire had started. And it wasn't going out. 6 months later, the city had moved on. The headlines faded, the hashtags cooled, and the media outlets stopped calling. But inside Crescent First Bank, change wasn't a press cycle. It was policy, practice, and presence. Danielle Moore didn't send her assistant. She didn't schedule a press op. She didn't walk in with cameras, press releases, or carefully staged smiles. She returned to the Michigan Avenue branch quietly, the same branch where she'd once been humiliated, disbelieved, and nearly escorted out. This time she wore jeans, a blazer barely pressed, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She looked like any other customer, and that was the point. The lobby was the same. The floor still gleamed. The brushed metal signage still reflected the soft light. But the feeling, that subtle weight in the air, was different. A young black man stood at the counter ahead of her, no older than 20, with a backpack slung low and a crumpled account form in his hand. His hoodie bore the logo of a nearby community college. Danielle watched as the teller, a woman she didn't recognize, leaned forward and smiled warmly. "First time opening an account?" she asked. The young man nodded, eyes still unsure. "Awesome. You've got your ID? Want me to walk you through the basics first?" The boy exhaled, a sound so small, so vulnerable, it would have gone unnoticed in any other space. But here it mattered. Danielle turned to browse the pamphlets, letting her fingers trace over flyers about budgeting, community loans, youth savings accounts. Not just corporate material, real tools, written in plain language translated into Spanish, Vietnamese, and Somali. In the corner, an elderly Korean woman was greeted by a Latina associate, her tone slow, patient, her hands offering a laminated translation card. "Take your time," the associate said. "I'm here to help." Danielle took it in, all of it. Not just the words but the energy. The room no longer watched people like her with suspicion. It met them with readiness. The change wasn't loud. It was quiet, foundational. And it was real. When Danielle approached the teller line, the woman behind the glass greeted her with a calm confidence. "Good afternoon. Welcome. How can I help you today?" Danielle slid a blank deposit slip across the counter. "Just depositing into a personal account." "Of course," the teller replied. "And thank you for banking with us. I'm Lauren, by the way. If you need anything else, just let me know." There was no pause. No glance at her outfit. No glance toward the manager's office. No questions about her worth. Just a transaction. Respectful. Professional. Human. Afterward, Danielle walked past the teller counters to the far end of the branch, where a sleek new glass office bore a small plaque. "Beth Morgan, branch manager." She smiled. Danielle hadn't spoken to Beth since the day she'd quietly promoted her. No grand announcement, no press coverage. Just trust. Beth had taken it seriously. Through the glass, Beth sat across from a customer, an older black woman in sneakers and a floral blouse. Her voice was gentle but firm. "I just want to make sure my money's not going to disappear," the woman said. "My last bank, they treated me like I didn't belong." Beth nodded with care, her hands folded. "I hear you. And I'm sorry. But this branch, this bank, we're not here to make you prove your worth. We're here to protect it. And if anything feels off, ever, you come straight to me. No runaround. No nonsense." The woman smiled. "Fair." Danielle turned away quietly. She didn't need to interrupt. She didn't need to be seen. She had seen enough. The seed had taken root. Later that evening, Danielle sat in her office at headquarters, overlooking the city she had once had to fight to earn space in. The Chicago skyline blinked with power and ambition, but inside her office, everything was still. She opened her journal, the same one she only touched when something mattered deeply enough to record. And she wrote, "Leadership is not measured by how loudly you demand change, but by how silently that change continues when you're no longer in the room." Across the room, her desk phone buzzed. A call from the internal ethics team. Danielle answered, her voice composed. "Nina? We have a situation. Oak River branch. Latino business owner. Denied a small loan. Manager said, and I quote, A taco truck doesn't count as a real business. Danielle's voice dropped. Qualifications. He met every single one. The footage is already online. It's spreading fast. Danielle didn't pause. I want every file pulled. I'm flying there today. No press. No statement. Just me. 4 hours later, Danielle stood outside the Oak River branch. A modest building nestled between a laundromat and a pharmacy. The protest signs had been taken down, but the air still carried the weight of injustice. She didn't enter through the front. She went through the back, straight into the break room where Harold Vincent, the manager in question, stood talking to a teller with too much ease. "Miss Moore," he said, clearly surprised. "I wasn't expecting you in person. I don't send people to clean up what I'm responsible for." Harold chuckled nervously. "This isn't about race. It's about standards. Some people just—" Danielle raised her hand. "Stop talking." Harold froze. "You don't belong here," she said plainly. "Not in this bank. Not in this mission. You're done." He didn't fight it. He saw it in her eyes, the storm she'd walked through and the fire she now wielded. That afternoon, Danielle met with Luis Camacho, the business owner who'd been denied. His daughter, maybe 9, sat beside him, eyes wide. "Are you the lady from the videos?" she asked. Danielle smiled. "Sometimes." Luis shook his head. "You didn't have to come." "Yes," she said. "I did." She handed him a letter. Loan approved, terms adjusted, mentorship included. "You deserve more than access," she said. "You deserve dignity." Later, back in her hotel room, she stared at her award, the one she'd been given 2 weeks earlier for leadership in the face of systemic resistance. It looked impressive, gleaming, important. And yet she couldn't stop thinking about Luis's daughter, about the way her face lit up just seeing someone like Danielle hold authority without yelling. She sat in the dim silence and wrote a single line in her journal. "The moment they start giving you trophies is often the moment the world tests whether you deserve them. Because tomorrow would bring more resistance. And Danielle Moore would still be ready." The morning after Danielle returned from Oak River, the headlines were already shifting. CO cleans house again. Too far or just far enough? Business analysts on cable news debated her leadership style, some with admiration, others with disdain. But what caught Danielle's attention wasn't the TV chatter. It was an envelope on her desk. No sender. Just her name in careful handwriting. Danielle Moore, President, Crescent First Bank. She opened it with the care of someone expecting either praise or poison. But what she found instead stopped her cold. "Dear Miss Moore, I saw you at the bank that day. I was with my mom. We heard what the lady said to you. My mom held my hand tight like she didn't want me to say anything. But when you made that call and stood taller, something happened. I've never seen anybody like you do that. I didn't know someone like us could be that strong and not yell and still win. My teacher made us write about someone brave. I picked you. I just wanted to say thank you. My name is Jordan. I'm 13. And now I want to be like you." Danielle didn't realize she was crying until her tears blurred the ink. The noise of the world, the pundits, the criticisms, the whispers that she was too much, all faded behind that letter. That single piece of paper reminded her why she started all of this in the first place. For the kids watching. For the ones deciding in real time what power looks like. She picked up the phone and called a meeting with Crescent First's board and foundation director. "We're going into schools," she said. "We're not just teaching financial literacy. We're teaching agency. What it means to be seen. What it means to lead." And just like that, the Jordan Initiative was born. It launched first in Chicago, then Indianapolis, then Detroit. Crescent First executives, Danielle included, visited underserved schools not to lecture, but to listen. They walked students through real-life financial skills, yes, but they also told their own stories. Of rejection. Of invisibility. Of becoming visible by building their own tables. Danielle wore sneakers to those talks. No suits. No security detail. Just a stool and a microphone. "I wasn't always a CEO," she told a room full of 8th graders on Chicago's South Side. "I was a girl whose first bank visit made her feel like she didn't matter. And I decided no one should ever feel like that again." The students were silent, but leaning forward. And then from the third row a hand rose. "I'm Jordan," the boy said. "I'm the one who wrote the letter." Danielle's breath caught in her throat. The room burst into applause. But she didn't head for the mic. She walked straight to Jordan and embraced him. "You changed more than you know," she whispered. Word of the initiative spread. And with it, more eyes turned to Danielle's leadership. Some cheered. Others sharpened their knives. 6 weeks later, former employee Greg Dawson reappeared, this time on a business talk show. She set the whole thing up, he claimed, voice cool. The cameras. The confrontation. It was a publicity stunt. The host leaned in. So, you're saying the Equity First initiative is fake? Greg smiled. It's great optics. But let's be real, she's a banker, not a civil rights leader. The clip went viral. Danielle's phone buzzed nonstop. Her comms director, Miles, burst into her office. We've got requests from CNN, Bloomberg, The Times. They all want a response. Danielle didn't flinch. I won't defend doing the right thing, she said. Let the work speak. But the story didn't end there. Because just as quickly, others began to speak up. Beth Morgan, now branch manager at Michigan Avenue, posted a message to LinkedIn. I was there. I saw what happened. It wasn't about protocol, it was prejudice. I stayed quiet and I regret that. But I've worked every day since to make it right. Danielle Moore didn't just lead. She believed in second chances. This isn't performance. It's transformation. Her post went viral in a very different way. Former interns commented. Clients wrote essays. A local pastor posted, Danielle Moore didn't chase applause. She demanded accountability and gave it to people who never had power inside banks like this one. Danielle still didn't hold a press conference. She went back to work. She flew to Atlanta to meet with a group of formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs. Quietly approved a grant for high schoolers opening their first savings account. And then one Sunday afternoon she passed a tiny bookstore in Bronzeville. In the window, taped beside a stack of Baldwin and Morrison novels, was a printed quote. Dignity is quiet, but it leaves echoes loud enough for the world to hear. No attribution. But she knew it was hers. She smiled. The truth didn't need defense. It already had a voice. Weeks passed and Danielle focused on what mattered, people. She began mentoring rising stars not from corner offices, but from overlooked departments, rural branches, compliance analysts, mid-level officers. One was Amara Fields, a policy strategist who had once been dismissed as too idealistic. Danielle remembered her data from an old presentation. Remembered how Amara stayed late, digging into disparities others ignored. She didn't just promote Amara. She invited her to build something. Together they created legacy circles, a mentorship and policy redesign system made up of those who had once been overlooked. Their job wasn't to talk diversity. It was to build policy with equity at the root. Danielle stepped back slowly. Her job wasn't to stay at the center forever. It was to make sure when she left, the center held. And it was holding. One afternoon, as Danielle visited the Michigan Avenue branch, this time in full CO regalia, a young black woman in a navy blazer approached her. Miss Moore, she said, breathless. I'm Nia. I help lead one of the legacy circles now. You probably don't remember me? Danielle smiled. I do. You interned in Toledo. You ran the numbers on the Community Reinvestment Index. They were better than half the VPs. Nia's face lit up. You remembered? Danielle placed a hand on her shoulder. We don't build legacy by forgetting the people who shook the ground before anyone noticed. And with that, she knew it was time to pass the torch. Danielle sat in the glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Chicago River, her hands resting quietly atop a manila folder marked confidential. Final succession candidates. The city bustled below, but inside this room there was stillness, a pause before history shifted again. She had spent years planting seeds, defending policy with fire, shielding her team from blowback, building systems that would outlive her title. And now, after nearly 2 years of redefining what leadership could look like, she was preparing to step aside. The folder had 3 names. All impressive. All qualified. But Danielle already knew who it would be. Amara Fields. She hadn't chosen Amara because of optics or pressure. She had chosen her because of conviction. Because Amara led the way Danielle once had, quietly, thoroughly, with proximity and truth. Amara had built community grant protocols that restored trust in neighborhoods long ignored. She'd rewritten policy with language that felt like people, not spreadsheets. And when Danielle had first asked her, "What would you do if this company had your name on it?" Amara didn't flinch. She answered with clarity, not ambition. Danielle invited her to the office that same day. It was late afternoon when Amara arrived. The sun angled low, casting gold light through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Danielle didn't offer coffee or small talk. She just gestured to the chair. No formality, she said. Just a conversation. Amara sat down slowly, reading the mood instantly. Something's changing. Danielle smiled faintly. Yes. I'm stepping down at the end of this fiscal year. Amara blinked. You're stepping down? Danielle nodded. It's time. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Like they both understood the gravity of the moment. Amara sat up straighter, her voice even. You built something most people thought was impossible. They're going to come for it the moment you leave. Danielle's smile didn't fade. That's why I'm naming you. Amara froze. You don't just know how to lead, Danielle said. You know how to hold fire without letting it burn you down. There were tears in Amara's eyes, but she blinked them back. I've never seen someone like me do what you've done, she whispered. Danielle stood and walked around the desk. She placed both hands on Amara's shoulders. Then you'll be the one they see now. The announcement was made internally first. No press releases. No speeches. Danielle had specifically requested it. The title wasn't the legacy, what came next was. The email traveled through the Crescent First system like lightning. From Manhattan to Memphis, regional offices buzzed not with fear, but with hope. Not because Danielle was leaving, but because Amara represented continuity, not collapse. Danielle spent her final months not in farewell ceremonies, but in closed-door mentoring sessions. She met with Amara, Nia, and a dozen other emerging voices. She opened her journals. Shared the hardest days, the worst meetings, the quiet doubts. She told them how to read between the lines in boardroom silence. How to hear bias in the way data was framed. How to hold space in rooms that didn't want them. She told them the truth. Sometimes your power isn't in what you say, it's in who keeps listening after you've stopped talking. Her final day at Crescent First came on a Wednesday. No balloons. No farewell montage. Just a single box. Her journal, Jordan's letter, the printout of the scholarship named in her honor, and an old photo of her mother on their Detroit porch. She didn't look back as she stepped onto the elevator. She didn't have to. Amara had left a note in her bag. Thank you for not holding the torch forever, but for showing us how to hold it high. Danielle read it in silence, folded it once, and placed it inside her journal. Weeks passed. And for the first time in decades, Danielle woke up with no briefings. No shareholder calls. No policy crises. She lived in a quiet brownstone a few miles from where her career began. She took morning walks. She visited her mother's grave without watching the time. She read books. Sat in silence. Learned how to be instead of proof. But today she stood across from a new building on the south side. Sleek, solar-paneled, glass-fronted. A sign above the entrance read, Jordan Moore Initiative for Financial Empowerment. And underneath it, inspired by Danielle Moore, whose leadership turned silence into structure. Danielle didn't go inside. She didn't need to. Through the glass she saw Shayla Johnson, now a college freshman, leading a tour group of high school students. She saw a teacher handing out budgeting worksheets in 3 languages. She saw a mural of community faces, smiling. She saw the future. And she saw herself in it, not at the center but in every echo. Later that night, she lit a candle in her home office and opened her journal to the last page. She didn't make a list. She didn't summarize milestones. She simply wrote, Legacy is not a title. It is a door you leave unlocked for someone else. And a light you leave on, just in case they're arriving in the dark. She closed the journal, finally at peace. 6 weeks passed quietly. Danielle embraced the slowness like a language she was relearning, walking to the corner cafe without her phone, tending to her mother's old garden plot with calloused hands, and for the first time in years, waking up without a meeting already waiting. She didn't miss the power. But she still carried the weight of it. That afternoon an envelope arrived by hand, thick cardstock, handwritten calligraphy. Danielle expected it to be another community panel invite, maybe a high school speaking event. But when she opened it, the heading made her breath hitch. You are cordially invited to the inaugural presentation of the Danielle Moore Scholarship for Community Leadership. She hadn't created it. No press release. No internal campaign. No foundation request. Curious, she flipped the page and read further. The scholarship had been established by Luis Camacho, the same business owner whose loan she had personally approved after the Oak River incident. A portion of his profits now funded a renewable $5,000 award for high school students of color who demonstrated leadership through dignity and courage, values Danielle had embodied that day. There was no media blitz. No mention of Crescent First. Luis hadn't wanted attention. He had wanted impact. Danielle attended the ceremony quietly, sitting near the back of the small high school auditorium where folding chairs creaked under nervous parents and teachers adjusted aging microphones. She watched from the crowd as students fidgeted in ill-fitting dress shirts and oversized blazers, eyes bright with possibility. When her name was called, not to speak but to be honored, the room didn't erupt in applause. It exhaled like a collective heartbeat remembering it could beat. On stage, a 16-year-old girl named Shayla Johnson approached the podium with shaking hands and a blazer too large for her narrow frame. She unfolded a printed speech. "I'm receiving the Danielle Moore Scholarship tonight. But I've already been receiving her strength since the day I watched that video. I used to think leadership was about being the loudest voice in the room. Now I know it's about being the most unshakable." Danielle stood. Not to go on stage, not to take the mic. She walked to Shayla and wrapped her in an embrace. No fanfare. No quotes. Just presence. Afterward, Luis approached her with his daughter. "You didn't just save my business," he said, voice rough with emotion. "You changed my daughter's world. You didn't even know it." Danielle placed a hand on his shoulder. "I didn't have to know. I just had to believe someone was watching." Later that evening, Danielle sat at her desk, the folded scholarship program beside her tea. She looked at it for a long while, then pulled out her journal and wrote, "Legacy isn't what people remember about you. It's what they begin to believe about themselves because of you." She didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anxiety, but because her heart felt too full to rest. A week later, a crisis quietly erupted within Crescent First. A whistleblower alert arrived through the anonymous equity portal. Region 3, covering 20 branches in Illinois and Indiana, was showing unusually sanitized internal reviews and lopsided loan approval data. Danielle wasn't CO anymore. But the message had still been flagged to her. She picked up the phone and called Amara. "What's happening in Region 3? She asked, already scanning early reports. "We're digging," Amara said. "But initial data says white applicants are approved at double the rate of equally qualified Black and Latino applicants. And the reviews? They're copy-pasted, scripted. Like someone's covering tracks." Danielle nodded. "Templeton? Looks that way. Clark Templeton, Regional VP. A seasoned executive who had once praised Equity First publicly while quietly gutting it privately." Danielle remembered how he smiled too quickly in meetings. How he once said, "We can't let equity interfere with efficiency." He had flown under the radar until now. "I'll handle it," Amara said, fire in her voice. Danielle hesitated. Then said the one thing a mentor must eventually say. "I trust you." The following week, Crescent First released a short but direct internal memo. Due to violations of Equity First protocols, Regional VP Clark Templeton has been terminated. Investigations confirm systemic misconduct, manipulation of data, and retaliation against compliance staff. We will not compromise our principles, not for performance and not for politics. Danielle watched it unfold from the sidelines. No interviews. No op-eds. She didn't need to speak. Amara had done it. One evening, as Danielle walked the aisles of a local grocery store, a young woman stopped her near the dairy section. She looked no older than 25. "Are you Danielle Moore?" Danielle nodded, softly. "My mom got her first small business loan because of your policies. And now she owns the corner cafe we used to walk past every day and dream about." Danielle smiled. "Tell her to keep dreaming." As the woman walked away, Danielle turned down the bread aisle, her chest warm with something simple but unshakable. Hope. Leadership, she knew, wasn't a speech or a stage. It was a seed planted in someone else. And now the harvest had begun. The conference room was still. No charts. No monitors humming. No assistants scrambling in and out with quarterly updates. Just one final folder placed gently in front of Danielle Moore. Final Transition Review. She opened it slowly. Inside were letters. From branch managers in Omaha, from schoolchildren in Detroit, from first-generation entrepreneurs in Atlanta who now own buildings where they once paid rent. And at the top of the stack, a note from Amara. "I don't aim to be you. I aim to be someone else's first proof. The way you were mine." Danielle closed the folder. Across from her sat Evelyn Hart, her longtime ally and the last person Danielle had asked to meet before stepping away completely. Not symbolically. Not from the title. But from everything. Evelyn studied her. "Are you ready?" Danielle looked out the window, the skyline now familiar in its indifference. "No," she said. "But that's the point." She stood, walked once more through the 23rd floor, past the wall where her name was still etched in gold, past the executive lounge, past the hallway where she once overheard someone say, "She won't last a year." She didn't say goodbye. She whispered, "Build well," to no one in particular. And she was gone. No elevator photo. No last wave. just the quiet click of the glass doors closing behind her. 6 months later, she was sitting in the back row of a community roundtable at a small-town branch in Mississippi. No one recognized her. The young teller leading the meeting spoke passionately about outreach, about removing paperwork hurdles, about loan translation cards and after-hours financial literacy sessions for shift workers. Danielle listened. And when the meeting ended, she left a note on the suggestion board. Leadership looks good on you. Keep going. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. 2 weeks later, her phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. Now almost 15, now leading workshops through the initiative that bore his name. Miss Moore, do you remember when I said I wanted to be like you? Danielle replied immediately. Yes. Jordan sent one more line. I think I am. Danielle put her phone down and cried. Not tears of exhaustion or struggle, but tears of arrival. Later that year, she returned to the place it all began, the Michigan Avenue branch. This time, she didn't wear a disguise or slip in through the back. She walked straight through the front doors, chin high, smile steady. Inside, the room had changed. There were more diverse faces behind the counter. The lighting was warmer. The atmosphere was attentive, not tense. And behind the counter hung a new plaque, a company-wide standard now posted in every branch. Dignity, fairness, respect. If your experience falls short, contact President and CEO, Amara Fields. Danielle stood there for a long time. A young teller approached, probably unaware of the moment. Hi. Can I help you with something today? Danielle turned. Yes, she said, smiling. You already did. She exited into the sunlight, where cars buzzed and pigeons scattered and life moved on. No cameras. No ceremony. Just a legacy walking quietly home. Back in her brownstone that night, Danielle opened her final journal, not the one filled with reports and quotes, but the one she kept for herself. The one her mother had once given her as a teenager. The pages were worn now, but the last page was blank. She picked up her pen and wrote slowly, intentionally. I did not build a bank. I built a mirror, so others could finally see themselves, strong, poised, and belonging. Power is not in the corner office. It's in the reflection you make possible. She closed the journal, set it on the shelf, and walked outside. The wind lifted her scarf. The streetlights flickered softly. And in the distance, a young girl in braids walked into a bank for the first time. Unafraid. Because someone had held the door open first. Danielle Moore didn't just fight for a transaction. She reshaped an entire system. She proved that real power doesn't shout. It shows up, holds firm, and leaves the door open behind it. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you leave standing. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet strength is still strength. Comment below and tell us, what part of Danielle's journey impacted you most? And don't forget to subscribe to True Echo, where the voices they tried to silence speak loudest.